Judas Iscariot, overwhelmed by the weight of his betrayal, regretted deceiving his master Jesus. The pain of his actions became unbearable as guilt consumed him. Realizing the gravity of his mistake, Judas returned the 30 pieces of silver, the price of his treachery, before leaving to take his own life in despair. In Matthew 26:24, Jesus had forewarned, "The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Judas's actions tragically fulfilled this profound statement, cementing his place in history as a cautionary figure of betrayal and regret. The dawn of a new day brought an ominous stillness to Jerusalem. The city, usually alive with the buzz of merchants and travelers, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Inside the grand chambers of the Sanhedrin, a hurried and chaotic meeting was underway. The religious leaders, consumed by their anger and fear, had decided that Jesus of Nazareth must die. His teachings had challenged their authority, and the throngs of people who followed him were a threat to their power. Bound in chains, Jesus stood silently amidst the uproar. The accusations hurled at him were many: blasphemy, sedition, and claims of kingship that threatened Rome's rule. Yet through it all, he remained calm, his expression serene and unshaken. The council members, frustrated by his silence, decided to take him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. Only Pilate had the authority to impose the death penalty. As the sun rose over the city, Jesus was led through the streets, flanked by guards. The people who had once cheered him during his triumphal entry now looked on with confusion and fear. Whispers of betrayal and rumors of treason filled the air. The crowd, fickle and easily swayed, was beginning to turn against him. At the governor's palace, Pilate sat on his judgment seat, a man weary of the constant unrest in Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders presented Jesus to him, accusing him of claiming to be the king of the Jews, a direct challenge to Caesar's authority. Pilate regarded Jesus with curiosity. He had heard of this man who performed miracles and preached of a kingdom not of this world, yet standing before him, Jesus appeared anything but a threat, a humble figure with chains around his wrists and an air of quiet dignity.
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
Pilate asked, his tone half curious, half skeptical.
"You have said so,"
Jesus replied, his voice calm and unwavering. The chief priests erupted in anger, bombarding Pilate with a litany of accusations. But Jesus did not respond. He stood in silence, his eyes fixed on something beyond the immediate chaos, as if he saw a reality no one else could perceive. Pilate was astonished. Most men would plead for their lives, but Jesus neither defended himself nor begged for mercy. Pilate, sensing that the charges were fueled by envy rather than justice, sought a way to release him. It was the Passover festival, a time when the governor traditionally released a prisoner chosen by the people. Pilate saw this as his opportunity. In the prison cells below the palace, a notorious rebel and murderer named Barabbas awaited execution. Surely, Pilate thought, the crowd would choose Jesus over such a dangerous man. Pilate addressed the gathering crowd outside the palace. "Which of these two do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus called the Messiah?" The chief priests, however, had already stirred up the crowd, whispering lies and inciting anger. "Barabbas!" they shouted. "Release Barabbas!" Pilate was taken aback. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the King of the Jews?" he asked, hoping they might reconsider. "Crucify him!" came the cry, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. Pilate hesitated. He knew Jesus was innocent, but the tide of public opinion was turning against him. The growing unrest threatened to spiral into a riot, something Rome could not afford. Pilate called for a basin of water. In a symbolic gesture, he washed his hands before the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he declared. "It is your responsibility." The crowd roared in approval, while Jesus stood quietly, his fate sealed. Pilate, yielding to the demands of the mob, ordered Jesus to be flogged and handed him over to be crucified. The Roman soldiers led Jesus away, mocking and jeering as they prepared him for execution. They draped him in a purple robe, a cruel parody of royal attire, and pressed a crown of thorns onto his head. Blood trickled down his face as they struck him with a staff and spat on him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they mocked, bowing before him in cruel derision. But Jesus bore it all without complaint. His silence spoke volumes, a testimony to his strength and purpose. He had come for this moment to fulfill a mission far greater than the schemes of men. As the soldiers led him out to the courtyard, the crowd gathered again, their cries of "Crucify him" echoing through the streets. The one who had healed their sick, fed their hungry, and taught them the ways of love and forgiveness was now being led to his death. But even as the people turned against him, Jesus looked at them with compassion. He saw beyond their hatred, beyond their ignorance, to the brokenness that drove their actions. In their rejection, he saw the reason for his sacrifice, a love so profound that it embraced even those who cried out for his blood. And so, with each step toward Golgotha, Jesus carried not only his cross but the weight of the world's sin, walking a path that would change history forever. The procession moved slowly through the streets of Jerusalem, the cries of the crowd echoing off the stone walls. Jesus, weakened from the brutal flogging, stumbled under the weight of the heavy wooden cross. Each step was agonizing, the coarse wood digging into his already torn flesh. The crowd pressed in on all sides, a mix of jeers and sorrowful weeping filling the air. Some mocked him as a failed king, while others, hearts breaking, mourned for the man who had brought hope and healing to so many. As Jesus faltered, unable to carry the cross any further, the soldiers scanned the crowd. Their eyes fell on a man named Simon of Cyrene, a visitor from the countryside. Without hesitation, they seized him and forced him to carry the cross. Simon, though reluctant at first, lifted the burden, his heart heavy as he witnessed the suffering of the man who had done no wrong. The procession made its way to Golgotha, a desolate hill outside the city known as the Place of the Skull. The name itself carried a foreboding weight, a place of death and punishment. Here, Jesus would meet his end, crucified between two criminals. The soldiers wasted no time, throwing the cross to the ground and stripping Jesus of his garments. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh, a bitter drink meant to dull the pain, but he refused. He was determined to endure every moment fully, to drink the cup of suffering he had accepted. The sound of hammer meeting nail echoed through the air as the soldiers drove spikes into his hands and feet. The pain was unimaginable, but Jesus did not cry out in anger or curse his tormentors. Instead, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Even in his agony, his heart was full of love and forgiveness. The soldiers lifted the cross and dropped it into the ground with a jarring thud. Above his head, they placed a sign written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, "The King of the Jews." It was meant to mock him, a cruel reminder of the charges that had brought him to this place. Around him, the two criminals were also crucified, their groans of pain mingling with the jeers of the crowd. Below the cross, the soldiers gambled for Jesus' clothing, casting lots to divide his possessions. The chief priests and scribes, who had orchestrated this moment, sneered at him.
"He saved others,"
they mocked.
"but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross, so we may see and believe."
Yet Jesus remained silent, enduring the scorn of those who misunderstood his purpose. He had not come to save himself, but to save the world. The women who had followed him, including Mary Magdalene and his mother Mary, stood at a distance, their tears flowing freely. John, the beloved disciple, stood beside Mary, holding her as she wept. Jesus, even in his suffering, looked down and saw their pain. With great effort he spoke, "Woman, here is your son," and to John, "Here is your mother." In that moment he ensured his mother would be cared for, even as he faced death. As the hours passed, the sky began to darken. By noon, an unnatural darkness covered the land, a silence falling over the crowd as fear crept into their hearts. It was as though creation itself mourned what was happening. The soldiers, now uneasy, stood watch, their confidence shaken by the growing sense that this was no ordinary execution. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
"Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,"
which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The words, filled with both anguish and fulfillment, pierced the hearts of those who heard them. Some of the bystanders, misunderstanding, said,
He is calling on Elijah. Let us see if Elijah will save him now.
A soldier ran to soak a sponge in wine vinegar and offered it to him on a stick, but Jesus refused. He took a final labored breath, and with a voice that echoed with both sorrow and triumph, he cried,
It is finished. My name is Simon of Cyrene. I was there when all these happened. In fact, I even carried the cross at a time for Jesus our Lord. Did you know when Jesus said, "It is finished," on the cross of Calvary, he declared the completion of his mission to provide salvation for humanity? This phrase signifies the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah, the ultimate atonement for sin, and the victory over sin and death. Jesus' sacrificial death paid the price for humanity's sins, reconciling people to God and demonstrating both God's justice and mercy. It marked the end of the Old Covenant and established the New Covenant, offering forgiveness through grace instead of the law. From this, we learn the importance of obedience and perseverance, as Jesus remained faithful to his mission even in suffering. It reveals the depth of God's love, as the cross is the ultimate demonstration of how much God values every individual. It teaches us to forgive others as God forgives us, and reminds us that salvation is a gift of grace that cannot be earned through our efforts. Jesus' suffering and victory provide hope in times of trials, assuring us that God's plans are redemptive and that victory comes through trust in Him. The cross calls us to live with eternity in mind, focusing on our relationship with God and fulfilling His purpose for our lives with gratitude, service, and devotion. Ultimately, when Jesus said, "It is finished," it was a declaration of triumph, grace, and love, calling us to trust in His completed work and share this good news with others. If this story blessed you, please share it with your family and friends as a Christmas gift or reminder of what Jesus has done for us all. Jesus loves you. Drop your comment and let me know where you are watching from. Thanks.